All right, we are live. Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. Welcome to our fifth and second to last panel of Maintenance Panel Week with the Maintenance Community by Upkeep. Really grateful to have some wonderful panelists with me and all of our live attendees as well joining today. My name is Heather Grant. I am one of the community admins of the maintenance community. Thank you once again for making the time to be here. If you are not already a member of the maintenance community on Slack, we would love to have you join us. I will add the link in the chat shortly on how to get there. Today I have, again, an awesome group of panelists with me. I'm really looking forward to our conversation about IIoT in maintenance. I know I'll learn a lot, and I'm really excited to hear some awesome thoughts from the group. The recording from our session today will be available at this link right after we end today, as well as in the maintenance community tomorrow. Our panelists themselves also are available in the Slack group and other channels, which we'll discuss at the end of our time today. So feel free to share the recording of this panel or the invitation to Slack directly if there's anyone you know who would benefit from hearing some more of this group's expertise. My last piece of housekeeping, and then we'll go ahead and get started. You'll notice that your cameras and microphones are not turned on today. So what you'll want to do if you have any questions for our panelists as our conversation kind of evolves, feel free to use the chat feature on the right-hand side of your screen there. See somebody already hopping in saying hello. Feel free to jump in and introduce yourself too. Let us know where you're joining from. We have a set list of questions that we'll kind of start to work through. But again, we'll do our best to incorporate any questions from our live audience here. I think that's all from me. Thank you one more time, everyone, for being here, all of the panelists, as well as our live attendees today. And I'd love to get us started with a quick round of introductions. So maybe let's start with Simon here. Simon, would you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your background, where you're based, what are your hobbies, what's your role at your company, and how did you kind of get to where you are today?
Sure, Heather, and thank you for hosting this panel today. My name is Simon Jagers. I'm one of the founders of Samotics. At Samotics, we monitor rotating equipment, motors, pumps, conveyors, by analyzing electrical waveforms based on AI. So as a founder, my current role is mostly I'm the company evangelist, which essentially means that I work with our clients and sort of translates their needs into product development and vice versa. I don't have a lot of hobbies. I thought about this question prior to this call. One thing to note is that I almost made the Dutch national Frisbee team a couple of years ago. So there's that, right?
Awesome. Well, happy to have you joining. Thank you again for being here. Sarah, let's move over to you. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about you, your background, where you're based, what's your role at your company, and how did you get to where you are today?
Sure. So hi, everyone. Sarah Jaskovits, co-founder, CEO of Augury. Augury is what we call a machine health company. We work with leading manufacturers in order to make their production lines more reliable and more productive so they can go and restock the shelves in your local supermarket or manufacture the vaccines that we've all been waiting for. We are 180 people across 2 sites. We have a team in Israel for product and engineering, and then the go-to-market team is here in the US, where I'm located as well. Hobbies, I used to have a lot of great hobbies, and then I had kids. So my hobby now are 3 young kids aged 2 to 6, and that's most of what I do outside of Augury is just be with them and the family. A fun fact, because you asked one, yesterday we had our first team meeting since COVID hit, and we grew really, really quickly in the last 9 months. We almost doubled the size of the team, and I never met half of the people. So it was really, really fun to see everyone in person. And I think the funniest thing is everyone had the same reaction when they met kind of their peers, and that is, you're taller than what I expected, or you're shorter than what I expected. So just getting used to the fact that people have actual legs in real life, it took some time to get used to.
Awesome. I know we've done a lot of growing internally as well, so that's definitely something I've thought about, as I have no idea how tall most of these people are. Thank you for being here. Super happy to have you joining, Sarah. Rob, I see you dropped on video for a moment, but we have you back, so why don't we hear an intro from you next?
Yeah, great. Hopefully my network connection holds up. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks Heather. And yeah, thanks for inviting me along to the event. So yeah, I'm Rob Russell. I'm the CTO and one of the co-founders here at Sensei. Background is as a mechanical systems engineer, mostly working in aerospace for the start, and found as a mechanical guy in kind of a software world. I was helping translate those requirements from the needs of condition monitoring within various sort of aircraft projects and defense type projects. And then with my co-founders, that we identified that what we were doing, we could actually apply it to the wider industry, and it's very applicable to the concept of IIoT was emerging, and in 2014 we made the decision, left our jobs and started Sensei in 2015, with a focus on solving predictive maintenance and downtime issues for an industry that we realised wasn't quite consuming the same way that some of the other more mature industries were. Yeah. As far as hobbies are concerned, I enjoy sailing with my family. I used to kites, quite anti-social, a little bit bigger than a single board to get everybody along. So gave that up. It was getting a bit dangerous anyway, and got myself a boat, and we go out sailing at the weekends. And yeah, like the other two, it's spending a lot of time with family outside of work, because running a startup is quite time consuming.
Definitely. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for being here. And then last but certainly not least, Mark. I know you well, but why don't you share an introduction with the rest of our group here?
Sure, thanks Heather, and thanks for having me on. So my name is Mark McKelvey, and I'm a product manager here at Upkeep, and I'm leading the development efforts for Upkeep Edge, which is our particular IoT offering. My background is in software engineering, and I've been doing that for about the past 7 years, helping venture-backed SaaS startups build products. And I've been working in the IoT space for about the past 2. Got started in that with Upkeep and getting that Edge product launched. So as far as hobbies, I would say like my main hobby now, and this is kind of a post-COVID hobby, is working out in my home gym. So all the gyms around here closed like everywhere else. So I turned my garage into a home gym, and that has been a lifesaver. So spend a lot of time doing that. And I also got into cycling too. I'm one of those people that got a bike during COVID and decided to start cycling around and enjoy the outdoor space. So apart from software engineering, product management, IoT, that's what I get into. So again, thanks for having me.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you for being here, Mark, and everyone else as well. I once again appreciate you making the time. So switching gears a little bit, kind of moving into our conversation today, we have been collecting questions from members of the maintenance community for the last several weeks. So I'm really excited to kind of base our conversation around questions from the people who are watching at home today. We have a couple of areas of focus within that. So our question is kind of centered on how to get started with IIoT and maintenance in their facilities, how to get internal buy-in into your IIoT program, and how IIoT will kind of continue to evolve in the maintenance and reliability space. So those are kind of our 3 themes for today. We'll try and move through them with a set of questions. But again, if you have any questions from our attendees, please feel free to launch those in the chat, and we'll do our best to incorporate them. So my first question, I'd love to just kind of start all the way very at the beginning. What is IIoT, and what are some of the different kind of IIoT technologies that are available for maintenance and reliability professionals at a high level? How does this come into maintenance? Anyone?
Well, I'll kick off then. So I think it's that entire sort of data chain, right from machine all the way through to the cloud, and I think that's so. There's the sort of smart edge devices that can be there gathering the data. There's the gateways that can be performing levels of pre-processing and gathering the information within the factory, getting it ready to be sent out to the clouds. And you've got various platforms and things there that can be used for that data transfer and data capture. in the cloud, and then in the application layer on top, one of the I's should actually stand for interoperability. So it's been able to connect to many different types of devices and utilize data from many different sources for common purposes. And I say very much it's the reuse of data as well is a key aspect to it.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. I think when you look at most of the clients that work with IoTs, sort of in the heavy industry and other production industries, what you typically see is that you have sort of this automation layer that drives or orchestrates assets on the action layer, if you will, and that is connected to platforms that orchestrate. So. And in that sense, I think what the IoT really does is bring the digital transformation to the edge, to in our case, the motors, the pumps, the compressors, the conveyors that ultimately perform actions or automated by the MES or by the machine and then orchestrated by the corporation. So in that sense, it's a set of tools that typically involve data, analytics, and connectivity, helping maintenance teams in particular to work better, safer, and smarter.
Yeah, so I definitely agree. I mean, at a high level, the way to look at IoT or any technology these days is, ingesting data on one side, turning it into insights, ideally those insights into actions that provide value, right? But I think that the question itself, is maybe a bit flawed, right? Because, 20 years ago, people would have asked, what is the internet, right? How do you find internet? But now we don't, right? We just take it for granted. And I think that hopefully 5 years from now, we won't have a thing called IoT. We'll just, this is how we work, right? Yeah. And people will focus more on what use cases am I solving, right? What problems am I trying to overcome? And then what are the right technologies to overcome them or to leverage? It could be IoT, it could be AI, it could be hardware or not, but the technology itself should be abstracted away from how we speak about the solution and the problem. And I hope that, we'll have this panel in 2 or 3 years and we'll ask kind of this question from a different angle, right?
Yeah. I think we even used to call it the World Wide Web, didn't we?
Exactly. Yeah. But if I may ask, so one of the things you're saying is the fact that it has its own sort of category, its own name, is a signal that it's sort of a developing technology that hasn't matured to the extent that it's sort of a common theme in industry. Is that a...
Yeah, so there is a survey by Gartner that was done that shows that 82% of digital transformations fail. And then the question is why, right? And it's because most companies say, I have to have AI. We need to find a use for AI, but AI is a tool. It's not an outcome, right? Yeah. So if you come from the perspective, I need to use technology, then you're probably going to fail because you didn't really define what are the success metrics. And I know we'll get to that later, Heather, in your questions. But, I urge kind of the whole industry, let's talk about the problems we want to solve versus the technologies we want to use. And I think it's no coincidence that, our 3 companies, right, 4 companies with Upkeep as well, are all around the machine health space, right? Yeah. So if you look at where does Industry 4.0 or, IIoT typically begins, it's let's make sure that machines work.
Yeah.
And then we can start optimizing for, quality or yield optimization or whatnot. Yeah. But I think the industry has understood very recently through COVID that the first thing you need to solve for is how do I make sure that my machines work and are available when I need them, and that kind of enables agility and resiliency in supply chains that are so needed today.
I think in that sense, you could think of it as sort of a Maslow pyramid, right? So first of all, if your machine doesn't work, all else doesn't really matter. I think what we're also seeing is that sustainability and in particular energy efficiency is becoming increasingly the sort of the second layer. And then on an almost more esoteric level, you start thinking about throughput, start thinking about product quality as sort of the enlightenment of a machine in that sense. But yeah, I fully agree with you. The basic is if your machine must work for it to provide value at a core level. Yeah, interesting.
Exactly, and we end up in many situations, and we get people asking us, what sort of sensors should we get? And again, that's like the wrong question. It's like, where's the business pain? What's the issue you're trying to solve? And then we'll start to talk about the technology you need to do that.
Mm.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly on that. You got to start with a single concrete business use case.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, very cool insight there. I think this question that just popped up from Matthew, you've talked a little bit about IoT as well as mentioned AI as a concept of digital technology. Matthew asks, how does AI analyze data? Is it from principles or pattern recognition? And when do you think AI will be capable of thinking and making decisions like a experienced human analyst? Launching right into a hard one there.
Yeah, no, I think it's the heart of the conversation, right? And there is a notion that exists out there. If you look at the startup ecosystem or landscape in the last, I'd say 5 to 6 years, there's been a notion of, there's so much data that exists on the production line. We have the historian, we have the MES, we have other, the CMMS platforms and whatnot. Let's take all of this data and shove it into a generic kind of machine learning meat grinder and try to find the anomalies. The pattern recognition will just kind of emerge. And typically that's not the case, right? So, at least for, the way our approach is, let's have deep domain expertise and develop the right, I think they use AI here. So kind of develop the right AI algorithms that marry the physical world with the digital world, right? It's not enough to just say, I have an AI algorithm, let's throw data at it and see what happens. You really need to understand kind of first principles, as Matthew said here. How do you approach the data? What are you looking for? And then you can have a solution that actually replaces the humans. I mean, in our case, we do kind of vibration data as well as other signals like magnetic and temperature. And today, most of our results majority of the results are fully automatic, right? So we can provide actionable recommendations on faults and kind of recommended repairs, fully automated without the human in the loop.
And I think it also raises a question, are you developing AI to sort of replace human skills, or is it to augment them? And I think fundamentally AI is very good at processing a lot of data in a record time, but humans are much more creative. So I think particularly for edge cases, it makes sense to sort of combine the two. Say, all right, my AI will transact this massive data set, and it will present some of the anomalies to an expert, and some it will solve itself. But fundamentally, a good question to ask when you get into this business is, am I trying to replace a human, or well, that sounds a bit like a robot, but is this about helping people to work better, safer, and smarter, or is it about replacing them? And I think that replacement is most of the time not a very good idea or unreachable for instance, because of the edge cases, and because of an AI fundamentally lacks creativity and problem-solving skills, which are available to specialists. So the combination of domain knowledge, domain expertise, creativity, and powerful AI and lots of data is typically where you can find the most value.
Exactly, and that was the experience that kind of drove us to start Senseye. From the work we were doing within the defence sector, you had specialists there that were looking at condition monitoring data from aircraft, and as the fleets grew, you had to scale that role. Those people were very hard to train, very hard to find. And we thought that under our approach to this, use the AI to help scale that expertise from the human, but also making the human part of the process and learn from them, right? So learn what's important and use that to drive the system. So we kind of use AI to model the machine, but we also model the user and model what they're interested in and create features and capability that can enhance that. So then you can, so somebody that being a maintenance project or a condition monitoring project in a factory that's looking maybe manually at tens of machines, and you can take them to looking at thousands of machines.
Yeah, and I think where the human particularly comes into play is knowing what to measure, because if you feed a bunch of data into an AI pattern recognition algorithm, but it's not the right data. You're not measuring the right piece of the machine, or you're not measuring the right vibration, patterns or sequences, because there's vibration measuring, monitoring can get very complicated and very nuanced. So, humans going to need to figure out, okay, what kind of AI models, what kind of data, and that's a really important piece of the equation. You can't, for an IoT project to be successful, you can't just, I'm just going to ingest a bunch of data and feed it into this algorithm, and it's going to tell me exactly what I need to do. You need to be measuring the right things with a clearly defined outcome that you're targeting.
Yeah, and I think also
That's really
certainly within the domain that I think all of us are active in. So this maintenance evolving around condition monitoring space, is that one of the core problems is that the sort of my kids call me a boomer, but perhaps a generation older than I am, the maintenance technicians are retiring. And young professionals nowadays, they want to learn how to code an iPhone app, which is a good profession, but iPhone apps simply don't fix broken pumps, right? So you have this massive skills gap emerging in the maintenance technicians domain. So an AI is best used, I believe, to help maintenance professionals work more efficiently. And so what we tend to see is that if you can flag where you need to pay attention to, what machines are in need of failing, and if you can, or in at risk of failing, and if you can say, all right, we got a bearing issue, or there's cavitation, that's great. But even if you can say we got a mechanical failure on your motor, we're not sure whether it's soft foot or something else, but make sure to check those out as the first, then you're starting to really focus your attention in that factory on those assets that need that attention, rather than doing checks for the sake of the checks. So I think, and obviously we want to build on that, but as a start, it's really around helping people to work better, safer, and smarter.
Yeah.
I think that this feeds to, I see a question by Rupesh, if I'm saying the name correctly. The expectations from the new the next gen maintenance technician or reliability manager is changing, right? So in the past, the expectation was, you go into the office or to the plant in the morning, you get a printed piece of paper. Here are your tasks for today. Turn wrenches, grease, bearings, and whatnot. And all of a sudden, you work with tools that provide probabilities, right? And your main job is actually risk management, right? This machine may fail in the next month. That machine may, you can keep on going for another 6 or so months or whatnot. And now they need to be able to make decisions based on all the supporting data, right? Mm-hmm. But what we cannot afford is for maintenance technicians to become data scientists, right? The same way that, I don't know, my mom, when she uses Facebook, doesn't need to understand anything about big data and databases and whatnot. The maintenance technicians just need to get the answer, or what is the problem, what do I need, how do I fix it, and how much time do I have, right? And what are the probability of failures there? So there may be teams within these large organizations, some kind of the process engineers or data scientists, but the output for the maintenance or the operators needs to be very, very simple.
Yeah, and that's very true. I think we've always targeted that it's the maintenance professional is our end user, really, fundamentally. And the way to get that, and it's back to Simon's point, we've got, these experts moving out of these companies. We've got a case of like high levels of agility in the workforce. People don't stay at this anymore. Is to capture the knowledge within the system and use that to feed back. So, for example, being able to identify there's a problem happening on a machine, but there was a similar machine nearby had the similar problem 6 months ago, and you can go and investigate how that was corrected and learn from your colleague that corrected a problem 6 months ago. And that's the way that you can become more prescriptive and aid that decision support is leveraging in a way that's accessible to the maintenance team.
Mm-hmm. And if I may ask, Mark, perhaps for you, when you talk about technology is very much capable, but I get a sense that you also need to earn the trust that the sensor does a good job of what it's doing. Is that what you guys recognize, that a maintenance technician almost by design trusts himself, but not the technology per definition, right? You really need to earn that trust. Is that something that you recognize?
Yes, definitely. I think a maintenance technician is going to look at something like this with a little bit of skepticism, and so it's almost like, okay, yeah, we'll try out this IoT system, we'll try out this pilot, but while they're doing it, they're going to be manually checking it themselves. They're going to be comparing it against past data. So I think it's definitely very important to have a simple system that they can verify and that also produces accurate data. And that just goes back to what I was saying before, that you need to be measuring the right things. So you need to have the sensor on the right piece, part of the equipment, measuring like the specific like working part of the machine that the maintenance technician is focused on. You can't have kind of like a generic solution that okay, it gets like 80-85% of the way there. It needs to be 100% of the way there for the maintenance technician to trust it.
Yeah. And Mark, what we find is important, be able to combine that sensor data with some context as well. Be able to understand, is it changing recipe every other day, and be able to consume that information that's coming from other data sources. So basically, the change you're seeing is explainable by an external influence. So therefore, don't annoy the maintainer with it, but having the facility to bring in those other data sources from other areas within the factory is important.
Yeah. We kind of touched about kind of adoption, right? Kind of Simon and Mark, and I think again, Heather, not to run too fast to the second and third questions that you posed earlier, but
go for it.
One of the reasons that most of these initiatives fail, and I'm sure everyone here heard the term pilot purgatory, right? So there was a McKinsey survey earlier this year where 74% of Industry 4.0 initiatives are stuck in pilot mode. Yeah. And there was actually an increase. I think it's like 20% higher than 2019. So more companies are trying out new technologies, and more companies are actually getting stuck in pilots and not being able to scale. And a big piece of that is around adoption, right? So, well, number one is getting the right KPIs, understanding what's the business case, which we talked about earlier. But the second piece is around adoption, right? Yeah. So, Augury or Sensei or someone can give the best alert, right? And identify a malfunction. If there's no one on the other side to actually repair the machine, we will never provide value. We need to achieve anything, right? So having the right setup, both on the company side, kind of the end user side, as well as on the vendor side, to build this adoption engine around these programs is essential. Because we don't want to leave it to the hands of a single maintenance technician that, does or does not trust the system. Right? We need to kind of build a program and encourage them to at least play along for the first kind of pilot and see the kind of build that credibility and trust in the system.
Yeah, and it's very true. I mean, one of the things that you find, or we find anyway, if as you're going into pilots, you're basically setting people up to find objections, right? Because they're saying, "Oh, we're testing this system. We've got to find out the objection." Whereas we kind of counsel clients to say, what we should go in do a rollout, and we actually refer to the term initial deployment. So we're going out to do deployment of the system, and the expectation is this is going to be here for a long time, so that people start to adopt it. And then it's trying to change that mindset away from that pilot purgatory that you're talking about. Yeah. Well, it's a challenge. It's definitely a challenge.
I love technology, right? So I mentioned I don't have a hobby, but it really is technology. So what sometimes is frustrating to me is that this technology can do great stuff. So just a couple of weeks ago, I said to our CEO, to Jasper, I said, well, for some of these features, the market simply is not ready. And he's a really great guy. I never seen him mad, but this time he said, dude, come on. As a technology provider, you can never say the market is not ready. If you're not, if it's the other way around, you're simply not providing what is needed by your clients today. So I think that is something, and I thought, yeah, I've come to think of it, I fully agree with you, with Jasper in this case, around it. So meet your clients where they are now, and I think what we're seeing is that, and I think this was also voiced by McKinsey, is that I think there's 3 layers that need to be in place, right? You have the process to adopt large-scale processing, large-scale technologies. You need the infrastructure to facilitate those technologies, and you need to have the organization that supports adoption. So, from a process perspective, focus on the value, not on the technology, which is something that I learned the hard way a couple of weeks ago. I think it's also around, creating a clear vision of where you will want to be in 5 years. And one of the things that I think is really important is that in 5 years, I think most of us will sort of adopt the view or accept the view that if you succeed in digital transformation, if you succeed in digitization, you're probably a lot better off than if you're not. So think, where do I want to be in 5 years, and work back towards from that. Infrastructure, it's about developing that same target state technology and work back from that, and build the ecosystem of partners that actually supports it. You can't all do it by yourself. There has to be an ecosystem in place, and you have to manage that ecosystem and work together on it. So then if you have that process and that infrastructure, I think from an organizational point of view, it really has, large-scale deployments work if it's driven from top down. Obviously you have to support, you have to have the support of the full workforce, but if top management is not on board, it's going to be very difficult to drive large-scale transformation. And then finally, I think we should also expect some sort of setbacks. And I know from a McKinsey report, they call it they had this great concept about, expect failures, because nothing goes well first time around. Acknowledge that and build on the lessons learned. So it's interesting to see that is moving forward. But it's not just around the technology. You need to have the process, infrastructure, and organization in place.
Robert, I think you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. So it's interesting to hear what your sort of experiences, if it aligns with ours, with clients where, when you do go into these initial projects, it seems to be a one-shot thing. So there isn't that willingness to try something out, fail, and then maybe learn from that and move on. Is that what you're experiencing with the clients you're dealing with?
Yeah, to some extent. I mean, I think you can classify to call it a clients in many ways, but 2 of them are the ones that want to run an IoT pilot, and others want to solve a business problem. And both are fine, obviously. But if you want to run an IoT pilot, that's probably not part of that process, that infrastructure, and that organization that looks 5 years ahead and said, all right, if I want to be there, then I have to start here now. I think so. When you start focusing not on the technology but on your business problem, that's I think where the best pilots are, because that is a clear problem. Probably a set of expectations, a set of organizational principles, and a willingness to sort of invest not just the funds and not just the time, but also sharing lessons learned and then building from that. And those typically are where we see that if you solve this one problem, you sort of buy the trust in the technology and can start to address other problems as well and build on that. So that's my experience.
Robert, from what we see, and this also connects to what Rupesh said here in the chat, the one thing that is key to being able to scale from pilot, from one facility to multiple, is getting to time to value, right? The fastest time to value you could imagine. And then once you prove ROI, you can then go back internally in your organization, and then you get more investment, right?
Yeah.
And today I can share for Augury that from deployment to the first machine saved, kind of machine that has been repaired, on average, it's 14 days for us, right? So how do you drive the fastest time to value so you can start proving it internally, and both for gaining the trust and the people in the field? Because I agree. Matthew here said that it's all about engagement across the organization, right? So getting the trust and the people on the production line, and then also proving the ROI, having the right models and calculators or whatnot to sell it to the finance team and the VP operations levels or whatnot.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right. I mean, it's just the last week I was kind of doing like value workshops with clients and trying to help them, understand the difference between where the problem actually lies. In some cases, is it downtime? Is it over maintenance? Is it high consumption of spares? And targeting that down. Yeah. Exactly, and sometimes it's interesting that it's a little bit difficult for organizations to put their finger onto where the problem actually is, but they know that there's something there, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's been a super interesting conversation. I think you've all kind of naturally answered a lot of the questions we set out to answer. The most interesting thing that's standing out to me is it's not all about technology, right? There's a lot of the conversation has been about the people side of things and how people are learning about and perceiving these technologies and engaging with them and using them correctly and thinking about how they'll make their lives easier and things like that. And so that's kind of the most interesting thing that stuck out to me so far with everything that everyone's saying. I'd love to kind of dig into one more thing that I've heard come up. I think Simon, you brought it up about the skills gap that's emerging in maintenance. So what kind of obstacles are organizations seeing in closing this skills gap, and how does that kind of relate to IoT and as a potential solution or as a potential aggravator of the situation? Like, what does that look like?
I think from a maintenance perspective, the skills gap is not so much with the technology, but it's more that young professionals typically choose, desk jobs, if you will. So there's, hands-on tool time, or the hands that can be on tool time are reduced. I think when it comes to learning about working with IoT, I think it's a flaw of the industry if you need to train people to use the tool, and I think it's more around. I think the problem really is with the industry. I mean, you're certainly going to have users on the shop floor. You're going to have users on management levels. You're going to have the CEO who might look at your dashboard, and I think it's up to the industry to provide actionable information that is probably sort of related to the context in which you're looking at that information. So and I think there's more and more technologies, VR, AR, that are emerging that are sort of making that skills gap smaller, incidentally, by adding more technology. So I also read the reports. I know that some people in the market say there's a lot that we need to train people to use IoT, but I would say the problem is not with the people; it's with the dashboard.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I think if you have to go through an extensive training process to get your platform off the ground or to get adoption, I think you're in a pretty bad spot. I think an ideal product needs to be very easy to implement and easy to set up. I think that goes to the skills gap, and it also goes to success or failure of the whole product. I think one of the biggest hurdles is just getting things set up. So if you show up with a really complex setup that involves a lot of specialized connections and knowledge and stuff like that, then it's just not going to get the kind of adoption that you're going to be looking for. So the more that you could come in turnkey, easy, like you just basically take this sensor, put it on the right piece of machine, and you log into a dashboard, and it points you exactly to the kind of concrete business information that you need, the better off that you're going to be.
Yeah.
There are two conversations here. Sorry, Robert, you want to go?
No, on you go.
So sorry. So there are two conversations here. One is, is AI supposed to replace people, kind of, or the concern that AI will replace people, and then there is a skills gap, right? And we're working with one of the larger paper manufacturers here in the U.S. in North America, and they told us that every year they lose 12% of their staff for retiring, right, or just retiring out of the workforce, and with it they lose a third of their knowledge, right, in the company. So they don't need technology in order to get ahead of competition. They can barely stay in place, right? They're kind of bleeding talent, bleeding knowledge, and they're not able to hire fast enough because, like Simon said earlier, young generation, people graduating out of engineering school don't go to the maintenance world, don't go to manufacturing. Well, they should, right? Because manufacturing is not that kind of stale, traditional industry anymore. You have AI, you have kind of new technologies coming in, and there's a lot of abilities for people to grow and develop new skill sets within this industry. So I think I think Henry asked here, is AI really closing the skills gap or creating a fresh gap? I think our goal is to not create a gap, but rather, I take the ownership on us as the vendors, as the technology partners, to provide the tools that will enable them to, on one hand, enable our customers to overcome the short-term gap that they have, and then in a longer-term view, bring a fresh batch of generations, of new technicians, new engineers into this world. And that could be through working with academia on new courses, and that could be through communities like this, right? Of just breeding in these interactions and trying to pull in new types of talents into this industry.
Yeah, and I think one other thing, you mentioned AI and the concept of, is it replacing people or something like that. I look at it as more as it's an enhancement to the existing workforce. It really allows technicians to focus on higher value, higher level tasks, as opposed to, so you're not going around, looking at a gauge, recording the information on a notepad, and then putting it into like a database or something like that. You have a machine that takes care of all of that, so you can think about like, okay, well, how do I extend the life of this machine? How do I use this data to think more longer term about ROI and how I can improve my overall maintenance practices, and even I can focus more on just like fixing things as opposed to going around and reading gauges and things like that. So it allows the technician to move up to a higher value position within the organization. And I think that's more what I see as like the near term kind of future for AI. It's not going to be like, oh, you're just a bunch of robots doing everything and you're out of a job. It's more like going to allow you to do better, higher value work.
Yeah.
It's exactly that. They're on top of the situation. They're being proactive. They're solving, the early stages of a failure mode rather than secondary damage, and they're staying ahead of the curve all the time. That's where we very much see it. Yeah.
And I think you could compare it, I suppose, to some extent to the emergence of Excel. The first spreadsheet program was called VisiCalc in the early 70s. And there were about 400,000 financial clerks or administrators in the US. And there was this notion of that will be, they will be decimated because VisiCalc or Excel or spreadsheet programs will take over their roles. Right? But to Mark's point, what actually happened when they looked 10 years later is that there were about 1 million clerks. And the reason for that was that they were not replaced by VisiCalc, Excel, and similar programs, but they could be more, they could do higher value jobs. Instead of just noting sales numbers from last quarter, you could do calculations, you could do forecasts, you could use that tool to provide more value to the organization. And so instead of decimated workforce, you had, at least a double workforce, simply because the tool allowed that profession to provide more value. And typically when something provides more value, you'll see it grow. And I think that's something that we should focus on in the maintenance domain as it relates to technology. If there really is an opportunity to shift your focus from break fix to thinking about throughput, to understanding how can I meaningfully improve the situation in a lasting way. And I think that's something to look forward to.
So this, I mean, the evolution of these roles, right, and kind of creating new jobs. And I'm kind of looking at the chat kind of between Matthew, Andy, and now Henry as well. And that, to your question, Matthew, other concerns organizations will need a new role to maintain the IIoT. I think not as much as, sensor batteries need to be replaced or whatnot, but there is a new role that is being created. So we see in our customers, when you go to that 20, 30 facility rollouts, and even within the plant itself, there's a new role that we see, a machine health specialist, that they call it in some cases. And if you really want to get the most out of the technology, right, and technology is not enough in and of itself, you also need to adapt new processes. Right. So if, in the case of if you're using TPM or IWS or other frameworks for working, there is a person that organizes, makes sure that the data is everything is connected and the data is there, and then it's also being used, right? And the dashboards are actually being engaged with, right? It's very similar to what we saw in the software world, where a whole new role called DevOps, developer operations, was created. And then a whole industry around that role kind of popped up. So we see the same here, right? We see people that are, you can think of it as kind of director of reliability 2.0, that is in charge not just of reliability, but actual usage of the tools and the processes that are put in place. And then that kind of, Henry, to your question, what can you do to be more relevant? I think opening up to this possibility that there's a new role, someone that manages these programs at scale. I think that is, if I was to bet kind of my future growth in this industry, it's there.
Really interesting.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've really recognized is how do you, make sure that the knowledge is democratized and you can enable people to take on those roles. A big thing that we've pushed on over the last 6 months is actually reflecting back on the company and the way that, our delivery team are fundamentally condition monitoring experts that are there helping customers deliver projects and deliver them at scale. But now what we want to do is enable the customers to do that themselves, our partner network and our enterprise partners. So we've taken all that knowledge that we've gained and we've embedded it in a quite straightforward process and making it available to people, and trying to show, like Mark was describing, that simple journey from connecting the device to getting value, and then reflecting back on that value within the organization. And it's about getting it in terms that you don't need to be an expert, I think it's maybe back to Simon's point as well. It's, if you can make something as simple as Excel, and it becomes, the technology just disappears into the background, and you just get on and do your job, right? And you don't even really think about the technology so much. You just think about what it is you're trying to achieve.
I think that's an interesting point too, and coming back to this idea of the skills gap is the democratization and the documentation of knowledge, right? How can you institutionalize things like this that'll be able to kind of overcome and outlast any sort of, skills gap or departure of retiring technicians and things like that. It's an interesting point as well. This question in the chat here from Ted, I'd love to ask the group, kind of going back to one of our earlier thoughts here, but what is one thing facility managers need to do to get started? We're pulled in so many directions. In your opinion, what is priority number one when talking about starting to move towards IIoT?
Yeah, so if I can go, so what we kind of touched on earlier, the number one thing you need to do is understand what you're trying to solve for, right? And then ask, what is the right technology? What is the right partner that can get me there? So understanding what is, and what we see is that typically people begin with machine health, right? I first need to make sure my machines work, and then let's start optimizing on top of it. So again, understanding kind of clear KPIs, what are you looking for? And then what does success look like? What are you trying to prove in a smaller rollout? And then what does success look like in a larger rollout, right? And then how does that affect not just your plant, but also the big organization that you're part of? I think just trying to clarify and answer those questions is the first step.
Yeah. I think what helped. Oh, sorry, Rob. Go ahead.
Yeah. No,
I
sorry.
Oh. Go ahead, Robert.
I was just going to say that I kind of describe it to customers in a three-stage approach, and it's like 3 E's. So try and establish a capability within a budget that you have and a technology that you maybe have, and utilize that, and have that established and then demonstrate some benefit from that. Then you can take that benefit and to get again. I think my internet.
Oh,
There we go.
You cut out a little bit there. Sorry, Mark.
We lost him.
Yeah, he'll be back in a moment, I'm sure.
Yeah, the only thing that I was going to add is just that the more starting with the business use case, like Zahara said, is spot on. And I would just say the more concrete and well defined you can make it, the better. So it's like I want to measure the runtime hours on my laser cutter machine, and that's going to save us 300 man hours from going out and like looking and recording it manually. And that in turn is going to save us $50,000 a year. And I'm going to measure it on these 3 machines. Like if you can come out with a well-defined problem like that, you're going to be in much better shape than if you come with some amorphous, hey, we want to just start monitoring stuff and it's going to make us more efficient. Like that's going to be destined for failure. Just get more concrete, the more well-defined, the better.
I think one thing that I find interesting is this notion of the customer journey. So it's, supposing to Ted's question, if you're a facility manager and you're going to implement technology, then obviously the best question to ask first is, what problem am I going to solve? And is this technology going to be the solution? But then as a facility manager, you're probably going to have your internal customers as well. So think about how will they learn about this new tool? How can we get their support for implementing it? How can we train them? How will they use it? And how will it improve over time? And how can I give them support? So I think to a large extent, everybody has clients, whether it's internal or external, and think about their customer journey. I think that's an interesting concept that is applicable in many ways, but certainly when it comes to adopting new technologies. That was my power statement, by the way.
And I think based on my experience in the last 10 minutes, make sure you've got a very good internet service provider. I think I'm going to put a complaint in.
I will add, so we talked about the one thing facility manager, or the first thing they need to do. I think the second thing is drive to value as soon as possible, as fast as you can.
Yeah.
And the faster you can prove value, you can quantify ROI, the better you can articulate both to yourself and to your peers and managers, should we go to that next step, and what does that look like?
Yeah, and it's kind of Robert, you indirectly referred to service providers, but I would say like that brings up a good point in terms of like what's the first step, how do you get this off the ground? And I would say start the more you can get closer to kind of like turnkey full service IoT implementation, the better. So if you have somebody that's like, hey, we're going to handle managing the fleet of devices, we're going to handle security, we're going to handle updates, we're going to handle like the proper measurement intervals, like everything's going to be set up, plug and play, turnkey. You just need to like install it on your machine, log into the dashboard, and you'll have the information. Like if you have that, you're in a lot better position than if you're like, hey, no, we're going to go out with a solution that's going to require us to like configure a bunch of devices and manage security and make sure people are logged in and configure the measurement intervals. The more you're into that area, the harder time I think you're going to have getting to ROI.
Yeah, it's very true. And just picking up on Matthew's activity and things like that as well. But what we're seeing actually is interest coming from telecoms providers and utilizing like 5G technology, but not necessarily the wider 5G network, actually using that within factory facilities as the wireless network, and then using that to connect out. these will be interesting moves, and we're starting to see the pool coming from the mobile technology providers with the use cases, and starting to see them marketed in this. So what we think of as 5G as consumers will actually have an interesting play within those industrial spaces as well.
Mm. No, I 100% agree. I think one of our investors is Qualcomm, and we've been working with them on kind of the future roadmap, and they're investing heavily in the industrial market. So what we're seeing in the consumer side is kind of the tip of the iceberg, right?
Yeah.
Literally what's coming, and it's going to change, kind of transform the way we think about connecting millions of sensors to the cloud.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, recognizing we only have about 3 minutes left, 3 minutes left in our hour, I do kind of want to put a pin in it there, I think, and open up the opportunity for everyone to share a little bit more about how people can stay connected with you. So I know most of you are in our Slack community. That's an easy way. I think most are on LinkedIn, but is there any other way that people can get in touch with you if they have follow-up questions, which I think there were a couple in the chat we didn't get to? If they have follow-up questions or maybe want to learn more about what you do, keep up with your activities.
I'll type my email address in the chat window. Happy to take any questions. It says here, say something nice. So I'll just add my email. Would that work?
Yeah, and I'll do the same. More than happy to connect to people.
Mm.
Yeah, and reach out. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that's easy peasy. Well, I want to say thank you one more time, everyone, for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time. It was a super interesting conversation, I think, for myself and hopefully for all of our live attendees and all of you as well. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to talking to you all again soon.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks.